Hello Year 12 and welcome to Act 3 Scene 2. You'll notice that we're starting partway through the scene. So if you're following along in your books, it is on page 170 at line 120 that we're going to pick up. So we're going to start from the silent play that we have at the beginning here before the actual play is performed. So at this point on the page that I'm looking at right in front of me. So we basically have a whole bunch of stage directions here, and they're quite important stage directions because they actually play out the play that is about to take place on stage. However, there are some problems with the way that this is done. So we'll read through it first and then we'll identify the problems with it. So dumb show follows, so meaning silent action follows. Enter a king and queen, very lovingly, the queen embracing him and he her. She kneels and makes a show of protestation unto him. He takes her up and declines his head upon her neck. He lies him down upon the bank of flowers. She, seeing him asleep, leaves him. Anon come in another man, takes off his crown and kisses it, pours poison in the sleeper's ears and leaves him. The queen returns, finds the king dead, makes passionate action. The poisoner with some 3 or 4 mutes comes in again, seeming to condole with her. The dead body is carried away. The poisoner woos the queen with gifts. She seems harsh and unwilling a while, but in the end accepts love. So if you've been following along at home, you will notice that there are a lot of parallels in this story with the whole story of what has happened according to the ghost. So we have the idea of a couple that is in love, a king and queen, then someone else comes and pours poison in the king's ear, the king dies because of it, and then the person who poisoned the king manages to convince the queen to marry him. So the problems that we have, which you'll be able to actually read about in the bottom of your books, is basically it's really unusual for an entire play to be done in full in silence at the beginning of a play. I mean, it's the same with like if a movie played out the whole story and fast forward before you actually watch the movie, it kind of ruins the story. And you can kind of see that from Ophelia's reaction in a moment, which we'll read. She's a bit confused as to what this is because it's not a normal thing to happen in a play. And then we're not 100% sure if Hamlet knew that this little prelude was going to be used here, but as Hamlet has had a hand in planning this with some of the players, it's likely that he would have had some knowledge of this, but we're not sure, and we really can't know just from looking at the play text. And then we can also see that this story is from the ghost's fabrication, but it's kind of providing a little enigma here for both Hamlet and Horatio and for the audience. So we're not 100% sure whether the ghost was actually telling the truth, and this kind of plays out what it is the doubts are for Horatio and Hamlet. And you'll notice as we turn over the page, there aren't actually any comments in there from Claudius, and Claudius is silent for most of this scene. So there is, because there is no reaction from him, Horatio, Hamlet, and the audience are all left wondering what is it that Claudius is thinking at this point. And the dumb show is kind of the first point where we would all be watching Claudius, waiting for his reaction with bated breath. But Shakespeare decides to keep us in suspense a little longer and doesn't actually reveal what it is that Claudius thinks of this little dumb show there. So moving on, Ophelia thinks this mime show is a bit strange, and she asks Hamlet what he thinks it's all about, and then Hamlet says it's a bit of mischief, and Ophelia says, "Oh, this probably shows the plot of the play." And then we have the player who's doing the prologue here, and Hamlet says, oh, this guy's going to tell us. And then he has a little aside, well, it's not actually an aside, but a little tack on the end of that line where he says, the players cannot keep counsel, they'll tell all. So either that is just him, having a little joke about the players there, or perhaps it's him being a bit nervous that through the players' actions and what they're up to, his plot for how to reveal Claudius's guilt is going to be revealed. So it can be read either way, and it depends on how you read whether Hamlet knew about the dumb show or not at the beginning of the scene as well. And Ophelia says basically he's going to tell us what that little dumb show meant. And Hamlet has another little joke with her there, and Ophelia, you can imagine a bit, oh, you're being a bit naughty, I'm going to listen to the play. So you can think of her reaction there. Where it has P on this version that we're looking at in particular, it just means player. So this one stands for player prologue there. And he has a very, very short prologue. When you consider like prologues that we saw in Romeo and Juliet earlier, this is very short. So we have, for us and for our tragedy, here's stooping to your clemency, we beg your hearing patiently. So he's basically just asking for the time to do the play in front of them. And then he exits. And Hamlet is a bit disappointed by the brevity of it, and so is Ophelia. And we have another little snide remark here from Hamlet, which can again be read in a couple of different ways. So Ophelia says, "'Tis brief, my lord," and Hamlet says, "As woman's love." So he could either be saying like one of three things, or he could be saying all in one. So he could either be making a universal accusation on women that their love is not constant, and we've seen that Hamlet may have a problem with women earlier on in the play from some of the scenes that we've read, or he could be having a particular dig at Gertrude or at Ophelia. Or we could say that it's all of the above. So you can read it a couple of different ways depending on how you think Hamlet actually feels about Ophelia at this point in the play. And then we have enter two players who are playing the king and the queen. And we have the player king who basically is saying, we've been married for a very, very long time, and it's likely that sometime soon I'm going to die and you will want to remarry. But she protests, saying only a woman who is part of her husband's death would remarry. And so we see that line where it says, none wed the second but who killed the first, which is just over this side here. So we can see that at this point the play is a bit more of an attack on Gertrude's actions rather than Claudius's actions, because it's talking about deciding whether to remarry or not, and there's a bit of an accusation in that line that anyone who decides to remarry is someone who has been in some way involved in their previous husband's death. And then Hamlet has this explanation here. You'll notice that wormwood is actually repeated in your playbooks, and wormwood is basically another name for a really bitter herb, and so it's Hamlet expressing his bitterness at what has happened. And you'll notice as well it's an aside, so it's not meant for everyone to hear, but you can imagine that the mention of this accusation would provoke bitter feelings for Hamlet, considering what he knows about Gertrude. The player queen then talks about second marriage and has this vow almost. So she says, a second time I kill my husband dead when the second husband kisses me in bed. So she's basically saying that anytime I would kiss my second husband, it would feel like I was killing my first husband, so I wouldn't do that. And then the player king actually has this address here, which addresses not only the player queen, but also mankind in general. So we have to look at a few key quotes in this speech. So firstly, we want to have a look at purpose is but a slave to memory of violent birth, but poor validity. So I'll underline that for you here. Whoop, sorry. So that really is an address to Hamlet himself. I mean, the player king doesn't know that, but we as the audience know that that's a quote that's very relevant for him. So he's saying essentially, purpose might have a strong beginning, but action is dependent on memory and passion. And we can see that through Hamlet's character. Initially, he reacted to the ghost with passion and conviction, but as the time has progressed further and further away from that meeting, Hamlet has waned in his purpose, and we saw that in the way that he chastised himself two scenes ago. We have another little key quote here where it says, "The passion ending doth the purpose lose." So we'll continue on and add a couple lines in there. So, "The violence of either grief or joy, their own inactions themselves do destroy." So he's essentially saying, when you lose your passion, you lose your purpose. And whether it's purpose derived from happiness or from grief, basically your actions will be destroyed. So you're not going to take action because you've lost the passion and purpose behind the reason that you took the action. And then we have another little quote here: "Where joy revels most, grief doth most lament. Grief joys, joys grief on slender accident." So that's saying those who feel joy most deeply also feel grief most deeply. They can easily switch between the two. So this rings true for Hamlet and his predicament, which is ironic as this whole play is designed to catch Claudius out, not to dig into Hamlet's own problems. So we're starting to see that this speech here is actually digging into Hamlet's predicament, Hamlet's character, and the way that he's feeling about how things are going so far in terms of his planning and everything. So the speeches are for Hamlet, but you'll notice that they are universal truths as well, because he's not addressing a single person. He is talking to the player queen, but there are some inclusives in there that indicate to us that perhaps this is addressing mankind more universally. And it's the same in Hamlet's soliloquy, "To be or not to be," because there are a whole bunch of inclusives in that indicate that he's talking, yes, about himself, but also about humankind in general and their own sufferings. We then have a little analysis here of the importance of fortune. And so basically this character is saying fortune essentially controls everything in our life, and it's not a force that we have any influence over. So it can control our love, our position, our wealth, and our friendships. And then he finishes with this interesting quote here, which also is a universal truth: "Our wills and fates do so contrary run." So that can be true for every single player that we see in this in Hamlet, and also you can probably see it in life as well. So everyone has different lives going on, and everyone has different purposes for their actions. The player king then finishes off by, "But die thy thoughts when thy first lord is dead." So he's basically saying, once I'm gone, you will lose that passion and conviction and probably change your mind. And we have the player queen here, and she is saying, no, there's absolutely no way I would do that. And then she calls down a curse on herself. She says, "Both here and hence pursue me lasting strife, if once I be a widow, ever I be a wife." So she's saying, if ever I be remarried, let trouble follow me from there. And Hamlet says if she should break it now, so he's basically saying she's made such an important vow that she can't go back on her word. And the player king then says, "Okay, I get it, you're really serious about this commitment." And then he says, "I'm going to go to sleep." And the queen says, "Sleep, and never mischance come between us again." So she doesn't want anything to separate them. And she exits. Hamlet then says to his mother, "Madam, how you like this play?" And the queen says, "The lady doth protest too much." Protest means promise. So she's saying her promises are too big, which, considering her position, is probably a fair comment, considering the way that she has acted as well. So we must think that Gertrude is probably quite uncomfortable at this point because of the way that her situation has been portrayed. And then the king says, have you heard the argument? Is there no offence into it? Argument means plot. And he's saying, is this an offensive play? And Hamlet chooses to misunderstand and says, no, they do but jest. So, no, it's just a joke. Poison in jest. So this is the first time that poison has actually been mentioned aloud by Hamlet in the presence of Claudius. And no offence in the world. So he's saying, no crimes are committed in this play. It's all good. The king then asks, what is it called? So that this is Claudius at this point. What do you call the play? And Hamlet says the mousetrap, which is what this scene is known as. When you think about it, Hamlet has set up bait and a trap for Claudius and is hoping that the play itself will be the thing that reveals Claudius's guilt, the thing that actually catches him out. And then he explains what the play is all about, where it comes from. And it's interesting that he names Gonzago, the Duke here, and his wife, Baptista, which is not what is actually being played. So rather than a duke and a duchess, we actually have a king and a queen being played. Perhaps this is part of Hamlet's interference. And then we also have this comment down here, Your Majesty, and we that have free souls, it touches us not. Let the galled jade wince, our withers are unwrung. So let's underline that because that's quite important. He's saying, we that watch have free souls, it touches us not. So we have no guilt, so nothing in the play is going to bother us. And then he says, the galled jade winch is actually another word for wince, our withers are unwrung. So galled is talking about saddle sores, and jade is a horse. I've already said winch is the word wince. So it was a common saying that the galled horse would wince first. So he's saying someone who already has a sore spot is likely to be the one that reacts first. And then he finishes off by saying, our withers are unwrung, so our consciences are clear. He then has another important quote here, which is, this one is Lucianus, nephew to the king. So we see here that the play is lining up more and more closely with Hamlet's own personal situation and his relationship with Claudius. And then Hamlet then says, has another little kind of filthy joke there with Ophelia. So you can read about that in your books. It's not worth me explaining. And Hamlet then continues this little joke. And we have the player, Lucianus, who is the nephew to the king, to the player king. He's saying a little chant here, and he's calling for the poison to do its work. So the poison that has been poured into the king's ear, he's asking for it to do what it is supposed to. Hecate is the goddess of witchcraft, so you can imagine this is meant to be an evil moment. And then pours the poison in the ear, and Hamlet says, he poisoned him in the garden for his estate. His name's Gonzago, the story is extant and written in very choice Italian. You shall see anon how the murder gets the love of Gonzago's wife. So you can see Hamlet in here is just drawing all the comparisons between Claudius and Gertrude and the whole murder plot that has been revealed by the ghost. And then Ophelia comments for us, the king rises, and Hamlet says, what, frightened with false fire? So are you threatened by this? And the queen is worried about if the king is all right or not. And the king says, give me some light away, and Polonius calls for light. So the king jumps up and exits. So for Hamlet, this is a confirmation of Claudius's guilt, and that's where we're going to leave off tonight.